A ring spun across white linen and landed in another woman's hand. "Pick it up," the mafia boss said, voice low enough to cut skin. "Before I forget, you're the only soft thing left in this room." Adriana Bellini had spent her life restoring broken heirlooms for people rich enough to pretend history could be polished clean. She was 24, careful with her hands, and one insult away from setting fire to a dynasty with a single sentence. In 2 minutes, she would throw her engagement ring at the woman everyone whispered was Dante Salvator's mistress. In 2 hours, she would be locked inside the most dangerous man in New York's house with his name on her future and blood on her palm. The secret hidden inside that ring was small enough to fit beneath a diamond. It would either save both our lives or destroy his entire family. And when Dante Salvator finally screamed, it was not because I had humiliated him. It was because I had just handed his enemy the one thing he would kill to keep from her. The first thing I noticed about Dante Salvator was not his face. It was the sound. Tap, tap. His gold signet ring touched the side of a crystal glass with the patience of a man who had never needed to raise his voice to be obeyed. The sound carried all the way down the length of the dining table and settled into my bones harder than the sight of the guns beneath tailored jackets or the old Italian spoken too softly by men who had buried people together. The dining room looked like a church designed by a sinner. Black marble, white roses, candlelight too expensive to be holy. A ceiling painted with saints who would have left if they had seen the guest list. I sat on Dante's right because that was where his future was supposed to sit. I wore my mother's pearl earrings and the engagement ring he had slid onto my finger 3 nights earlier in front of 6 witnesses, 2 priests, and 1 lawyer. It was a beautiful ring. Old cut diamond, heavy platinum, the kind of piece my father would have admired even while hating the man who bought it. My father was dead, and I still didn't know whether his last act had been love or surrender. Across the table, Bianca Vescari laughed with her red mouth barely hidden behind her wineglass. She was the kind of woman who seemed to arrive perfumed by consequence. Dark hair, bare shoulders, a silk dress the color of old blood. She leaned toward Dante once, twice. Her fingers touched his cuff like they knew the root. No one corrected her. No one corrected the whispers either. His mistress. I had heard it from the women in the powder room. From the waiter who went pale when he saw me. From the silence that fell every time Bianca smiled too easily and Dante did not bother to stop her. I should have asked him. But there was a limit to what pride could survive in public. Dante had spoken no more than 12 words to me all evening. Eat, drink, stay close, we'll talk later. We'll talk later, as if I were a package he could leave unopened until the room was clear. Tap, tap. The ring on his hand kissed the glass again. My pulse went thin. Bianca lifted her champagne and said, "To arrangements that benefit everyone." Her eyes came to me on the last word. Something inside me went very still. I looked at Dante. He was 34, dark-haired, broad-shouldered, controlled in a way that felt more dangerous than rage. His tie was black. His expression gave nothing away. Men like him did not fidget. Men like him rearranged other people's lives and called it necessity. I slipped the ring off my finger. The table did not notice at first. I stood. Every sound in the room seemed to draw back at once. Dante's eyes lifted to me with no visible surprise. That was somehow worse. "Adriana," he said. I turned to Bianca instead. "I'm done." Then I tossed the ring. It flashed once in the candlelight and landed against the white linen near Bianca's hand. For one strange, suspended second, no one moved. Then Bianca smiled. And Dante stood so fast his chair struck the marble behind him like a gunshot. "No!" The word hit the room before he did. He slapped the table with both hands and flipped the entire thing over in a violent, impossible sweep of muscle and fury. Crystal exploded. Plates shattered. Wine ran dark over linen like a wound opening. Men lunged backward. Someone shouted in Italian. Bianca screamed when the ring bounced from the cloth and disappeared into the spray of broken glass at her feet. I didn't scream. I don't know why. Maybe I had already used up the part of me that panicked. Dante came around the wreckage with murder in his face, not theatrical anger, not insulted male pride. Fear, raw, brief, real. "Don't touch it," he roared at Bianca. She froze, so did everyone else. I looked down through the broken crystal glittering over the floor, found the ring beneath the leg of an overturned chair, and crouched. "Adriana," somebody whispered, horrified. A shard cut the heel of my palm when I reached in. I felt it, warm, sharp, immediate. Still, I closed my fingers around the ring and stood. Blood slid down the side of my hand and over the platinum band. Dante stopped directly in front of me. He was close enough that I could smell cold night on his coat beneath cedar and smoke. His chest rose once, hard. Everyone in the room waited for me to beg. I didn't. I set the ring on the only piece of table left standing between us. My voice came out softer than I expected. I said I'm done. His eyes dropped to my bleeding palm, then lifted back to my face. That was the moment something changed. Not when I threw the ring, not when he threw the table. It happened there in the broken silence, with blood cooling on my skin and his entire violent kingdom pretending not to breathe. "You get quieter," he said, almost like he hated the fact. "The angrier you are," I swallowed. "So," his mouth moved once, but it was not a smile. "So," he said, very low, "that makes you dangerous, little spark." Bianca took one step back. Dante never looked at her. Two men appeared at the doors as if called by instinct. Another lifted the fallen chair away from the ring. No one touched me. Dante reached past my shoulder, opened his hand, and waited. I stared at it. "Give it to me." "I don't want it." "That," he said, "was never the question." I should have refused. Instead, maybe because everyone else in that room already belonged to his gravity, I placed the ring in his palm. His fingers closed over it. Tap, tap. He struck the ring once against the inside of his glass, as if checking that it still existed. Then he looked at the men by the door. "Seal the house." A chill moved cleanly down my spine. I turned back to him. "You can't be serious." He held my gaze like a blade held flat. "You humiliated me in my own home, bled on my floor, and nearly handed my uncle's woman the one thing keeping you alive." His eyes flicked once to my hand. "You are not leaving tonight." The words should have felt like captivity. They felt worse. They felt like truth. Behind me, somewhere beyond marble and candle smoke and men with guns tucked close to their ribs, the front gates of Salvator House began to close, and they did not reopen. I woke in a room bigger than my father's workshop. That was the first insult. The second was that someone had undressed me enough to remove my blood-stained dress and bandage my hand without asking permission. The third was the tray on the bedside table, espresso, toasted bread, apricot jam, and a note written in a sharp masculine hand. "Do not test the gates. DS." No apology for the lock I discovered on the outside of my bedroom door when I tried it. No explanation for why the ring I had thrown was now sitting in a velvet box on the dresser like a dare. I washed at a sink that smelled faintly of lemon soap and old stone, braided my hair with one hand because the other still stung, and opened the curtains on a river-gray morning. The Hudson lay beyond the grounds like sheet metal. Men in dark coats moved along the perimeter below with the trained stillness of dogs who had learned not to bark unless told. The house itself was too quiet, not peaceful, controlled. I found Teresa Valley in the hallway before I found anyone else. She was round-faced, silver-haired, and wearing an apron over a black dress that looked expensive enough to judge me on sight. Instead, she took one look at my bandage and clicked her tongue. "Men," she said. I blinked. "That covers a lot of possibilities. In this house, enough." She pressed a plate of almond biscuits into my good hand and motioned for me to follow. "Eat while you can." Arguments go better with sugar. I'm not staying long enough to need strategy. "Of course not," she said. "And I'm 26. She led me downstairs to a smaller sitting room lined with old books and locked cabinets. Dante stood at the far window on the phone, one hand in his pocket, the other resting flat against the glass. Even from behind, he looked like the answer to a question no decent person should ask. He turned when Teresa announced me with a dry, "Your prisoner is vertical." His gaze landed first on my hand, then on the untouched velvet box I had carried down only because I refused to let anyone think I had accepted it by leaving it upstairs. "Sit," he said. "No." Teresa sighed and left the room with the expression of a woman already planning funeral food. Dante ended his call. "You went digging through broken crystal with bare skin," he said. "Any reasonable person would have stayed in bed. Any reasonable person wouldn't have been locked in your house. You weren't locked in a room, you were protected in one." "From what?" "Your table." His eyes held mine, calm, heavy. "From the people who wanted the ring." I laughed once because if I didn't, I was afraid I might throw something else. "Right, the ring, not me." "That's comforting." His jaw shifted. "A tiny thing. On another man, I might not have noticed it." "I sent men to your apartment and your father's shop before dawn." My breath caught. "Why?" "Because if last night confirmed anything, it's that your life before me is finished, whether you want it finished or not." The sentence landed like a door closing. "My workshop has been searched." "For what?" He nodded toward the velvet box. "Answers." I stared at him. "You expect me to believe I accidentally picked up a piece of jewelry that can start a war?" "No." He came closer. "I expect you to stop pretending your father told you nothing." That hit harder than it should have. Probably because a part of me had spent the last month asking the same question of a dead man who could not answer. Before I could speak, the door burst open and a large man with a bruised face and a paper cup of black coffee stepped inside. He stopped short when he saw me. "Ah," he said, "the future misses." "Salvator, great. I definitely dressed wrong for emotional warfare." "Nico," Dante said. "What? I'm being respectful." He looked at my plate. "Did Teresa give you biscuits? She loves you already." "I've worked here 6 years, and she still acts like feeding me pasta is a moral trial from God." "She feeds you pasta every night," Dante said. "Exactly." "She's trying to break my discipline because she knows I'm cutting weight." "For what?" I asked before I could stop myself. Nico put a tragic hand to his chest. "For dignity, signorina." Despite everything, a sound escaped me, not quite a laugh. Close enough that Nico brightened like he'd dragged sunshine in by mistake. Dante noticed. Of course he did. "Nico will drive you to Bellini Restorations," he said. "You'll collect what you need, you'll be accompanied." "I'm not a hostage." "No," he said, "your leverage." "Which is more expensive?" The car was a black armored sedan that smelled like leather, gun oil, and the mint gum Nico chewed with the desperation of a sinner attempting reform. He drove one-handed through Little Italy, while 2 men followed behind us and talked to me as if we were cousins fleeing a wedding. "You should know," he said, glancing at me in the mirror. "The boss only throws furniture when it's genuinely earned, so congratulations." "I'm thrilled." "He's been worse," Nico said. "Once he flipped a piano," I turned. "That's not possible," Nico shrugged. "It was a small piano." My father's shop sat on Mulberry Street between a watchmaker and a bakery that had been there so long the awning looked inherited. The shutters were up, but one lock had been cut and replaced. Inside, my workbench was exactly where I'd left it. My loop, my files, my lamp, my coffee mug with a chip in the handle, my life. Until I saw the drawers. Open, every velvet tray disturbed. A cold anger walked through me with very small feet. I crossed to my bench, touched the scar in the oak where my father had once slipped with a graver, and fought the urge to cry in front of men with guns. When I turned, Dante was in the doorway. I hadn't heard him come in. "You said Nico would bring me." "He did. I didn't invite you inside. No one ever does." His gaze moved over the bench, the scattered settings, the tiny silver dust caught in the morning light. "This was your whole world," he said. "It still is." "Not anymore." I hated how gently he said it. That gentleness was worse than anger. Anger was clean. Gentleness implied he thought he understood damage. I picked up my loop and slid it into my pocket. Then open the door. He looked at me for a long second, then at my bandaged hand, then back. If you leave my sight again without security, he said quietly, next time the locks stay. By afternoon, Bellini Restorations existed in 2 places. The legal one stood on Mulberry Street, beneath my father's name in fading gold leaf. The real one lived in a converted room on the east side of Salvetter House, where Dante had somehow moved my bench, my tools, my magnifying lamp, my polishing motor. And even the cracked ceramic dish I kept loose stones in without asking permission once. It should have infuriated me more than it did. Instead, when I walked in and saw my bench placed beneath a tall window, morning light angled exactly where I liked it. Something ached in me, so cleanly I had to set my hand against the wood to stay upright. He had noticed. That was the problem with men like Dante. When they were cruel, you could protect yourself. When they paid attention, they became difficult. Lucia Ferrero found me there 20 minutes later. She was elegant in the severe way knives were elegant. Black suit, dark hair pinned back. No wedding ring, no wasted movement, no softness offered by accident. She carried a leather folder and the look of a woman who had spent half her life telling dangerous men what numbers meant. I run his books, she said by way of introduction, and his patience when he misplaces it. I didn't know patience could be itemized. In this house, everything can. Her gaze moved over the room. I came to tell you 2 things. First, your workshop on Mulberry is being watched. Second, if you're smart, you will not mistake his interest for safety. I set a pair of tweezers down. Is that concern? It's accounting. Women who matter to men like Dante distort judgment. Distortion becomes weakness. Weakness gets people buried. You make him sound almost human. She didn't smile. That would be the risky part. After she left, I opened the velvet box again. The engagement ring lay against black silk like a bright lie. I stared at it for a long time before slipping on my loop and bringing it under the light. Old European cut diamond. Fine platinum shoulders, hand-finished prongs, family money, not new money. The inside shank carried a date and Dante's initials, and beneath that I went still. There was another line. Too shallow to catch unless the light struck sideways. Micro-engraving. My father had taught me the technique when I was 16, hands over mine. Both of us bent above a training band while summer heat rolled through the open window, and he said, "The smallest marks survive the longest." That's why powerful men hide things in them. I adjusted the lamp. There it was, numbers, letters. A coded sequence cut so delicately into the metal it vanished unless you knew where to look. My stomach dropped. A knock sounded once, and Marco Vitelli stepped in carrying a tray of espresso cups. He was Dante's dock manager, built like a wall but smiling like a man who still remembered what jokes were for. "Teresa said you forgot lunch," he said. "Which in this house qualifies as rebellion." I took the cup he offered. "Thank you." Marco glanced at the ring under magnification. "Pretty thing. It's more complicated than pretty. That," he said, "could be our family motto." He stayed while I shifted the light and copied the sequence onto paper. Port numbers, I thought at first, then storage codes, then something worse, off-book routes, shipment markers, private holdings, not jewelry at all, a map. My father had hidden a map inside my engagement ring. The room felt smaller suddenly, colder. Marco noticed the change in my face. "What is it?" Before I could answer, glass shattered. The bullet came through the far window and buried itself in the cabinet behind me with a crack so violent my body moved before my thoughts did. Marco hit the floor. I dropped beside the bench. Another shot split the frame. Men shouted in the corridor. The house answered with motion. Boots, orders, metal. Dante arrived in the doorway with a gun already in his hand. He crossed the room in 3 strides, crouched, and put one broad palm against the back of my neck as if checking that I was still in one piece. "Are you hit?" "No." His thumb brushed my skin once. Just once. Heat shot through me so quickly it felt dishonest. He looked to Marco. "Perimeter." "East hedge," Marco said, already moving. Single shooter, maybe two. Dante rose without removing his hand from me until the very last second. "Lock this wing," he snapped. Then he was gone. For a moment, there was only my own breathing, ragged and small in a room that still smelled like metal dust and fresh gunfire. And then, because this was how my life had apparently chosen to continue, my eyes dropped back to the paper on the bench. The numbers had not changed, but their meaning had. Dante from the hall outside the workshop. Dante heard the tremor in her breath and wanted, with a clarity that irritated him, to go back in. Not because she was useful, not because of the ring. Because she had not screamed. Because she had crouched under gunfire the same way she had stood in broken crystal the night before. Quiet, pale, bleeding if necessary, but never asking permission to endure it. Bianca had never mattered. The trap had never been for Adriana. Yet somehow the only person in the house still capable of unsettling him was the woman who lowered her voice when the world turned violent. He closed his hand around the gun. Raphael had moved faster than expected. That meant the war was no longer coming. It was here. When Dante returned, he found me still seated on the floor with the paper in my hand. "What is it?" he asked. I looked up. For the first time since meeting him, I saw something in his face that did not belong to power. Tension. Yes, but beneath it, the hard old shape of dread. I held up the copied sequence. "I think," I said, "my father hid your empire inside my ring." We left the house at dusk in a convoy that pretended not to be one. Dante said it was safer to move the ring and the code before Raphael tried again. He did not explain why his uncle wanted it. He did not explain why Bianca Vescari had been seated at his table the night I threw everything over. He only put me in the back of an SUV beside a locked metal case and sat across from me with his knees almost touching mine. Almost became a cruel little word around him. Almost enough room. Almost enough air. Almost enough honesty. The city bled into the outskirts, brick giving way to river, road, and dark trees. Until the convoy took a turn I did not know, and Nico's voice came over the radio like a man narrating his own funeral. "Important update, there are geese at this property." "Drive," Dante said. "I am driving." "I'm also informing command that geese are agents of chaos and should be banned from all secure locations." I looked up despite myself. "You're afraid of geese." Nico glanced at me in the mirror. At 12 I was attacked by one outside a church. It looked me in the eye, Signorina. Nothing with wings should have that much contempt. Even Dante's mouth shifted, barely, but I saw it. The safe house turned out to be an old stone rectory beside a deconsecrated chapel on the river, its grounds silver with winter grass. Geese moved across the bank like entitled widows. Nico refused to get out until Marco physically opened his door and told him God had abandoned him hours ago. Inside, the air held cold incense and damp wood. Thick walls, narrow windows. A staircase that groaned like an old man insulted by our weight. Lucia met us in the chapel itself beneath a dark crucifix and took the metal case from Dante. "Tell her now," she said quietly. I looked between them. "Tell me what?" Dante held my gaze a beat too long. "Bianca Vescari was never my mistress." The room seemed to shift around that sentence. I laughed once, because humiliation often wore the same shoes as relief. That would have been useful information before the table. "She was Raphael's woman," he said. I kept her close because she carried messages. I let her be seen because men who think they understand a weakness stop looking for the real one. "And what am I?" I asked. Another tactic. Something hard crossed his face. "No." The single syllable landed heavier than a speech. I should have felt better. Instead, I felt foolish, angry, and strangely exposed, as if discovering I had been jealous of a lie made the jealousy more revealing, not less. Lucia stepped aside to let Marco pass. He carried a compact field kit and offered me a small, apologetic smile. "Bullet missed the artery in the workshop cabinet," he said. "Your tools are safe." "My priorities are excellent," I muttered. "Your priorities are yours," Dante said. "That's why you're still alive." Before I could answer, the chapel windows burst inward. Gunfire tore through the nave. Lucia dropped. Marco dragged the case behind a pew. Dante caught my wrist and hauled me down with him as stained glass rained over the stone floor in bright, murderous pieces. The sound inside the chapel was impossible. Too loud, too holy. "Move," Dante said. He pushed me through a side door into a narrow sacristy lined with old vestments and locked cabinets. The air was close, dark. My pulse slammed against my throat. On the other side of the wall, men shouted and returned fire. Something heavy struck the door once, then again. Dante braced himself against it with one shoulder and lifted his gun. I realized, in the strange, clear way fear sometimes made knowledge arrive, that he was breathing differently. Too shallow. Too controlled. "Dante!" He didn't look at me, I did, and I saw it, not fear of dying, fear of enclosed heat, of locked wood, of not getting to someone in time. His face had gone almost blank with it. The door shook again. Without thinking, I moved in front of him enough to touch his free hand. He looked at me then. His skin was cold, not metaphorically, actually cold. "It's just a door," I whispered. His fingers closed over mine so tightly it almost hurt. "No," he said, voice stripped down to the beam. "It never is." He let go first. Of course he did. That was restraint number 1, though I didn't know yet to count them. When the shooting outside paused, Dante opened the sacristy door and moved us down a side corridor. We came out behind the altar into a chapel full of splintered pews, gun smoke, and men bleeding in ways that made the world feel suddenly primitive. Marco had a cut over one eye. Nico had somehow acquired a brass candle stand and was holding it like a medieval weapon. "I panicked," he said when he saw me looking. Also, one of the geese followed us, and I think that means something biblical. Teresa would have laughed. I nearly did. Lucia pressed a hand to her shoulder where blood soaked her jacket, but she was upright, furious, and very much alive. Raffles' men had retreated. For now. Outside, the sky had gone black over the river. Dante stepped close enough to examine my face for cuts. His thumb brushed a line of dust from my cheekbone. Slow, careful. The world narrowed to that touch with humiliating speed. "Why didn't you tell me the truth about Bianca?" I asked. "Because truth is a luxury in my family. That's not an answer." "No," he said, eyes still on mine. "It's the only one I have." Then he drew back before either of us could mistake the moment for something gentler than it was. Nico limped past, muttering, "If Teresa hears I fought armed men with church furniture and still didn't get pasta tonight, I'm resigning." The absurdity of it loosened something in my chest. Just enough to breathe. Later, when the floor had been cleared and Lucia's shoulder bandaged, I stood alone at the chapel threshold and listened to the river moving in the dark. Dante came to stand beside me. "She was never mine," he said, not looking at me. "Bianca, the lie, the humiliation, I swallowed." Then, because the truth was ugly and still somehow a relief, I answered with the only one I had. I was wrong. The morning after the chapel, Salvator House felt less like a prison and more like the inside of a wound. Everyone moved carefully around it. Lucia kept working with one arm in a sling, which made her somehow more alarming. Marco took over perimeter rotations with a crease between his brows I hadn't seen before. Teresa brought broth to injured men and scolded them as if shame closed bullet holes faster. Nico limped dramatically for 2 hours until Lucia informed him the bruise was on the wrong leg. I stayed in the workshop. That was where I understood things. Metal obeyed heat, stone obeyed pressure. Tiny flaws could be found if you angled light correctly, and admitted that perfection was mostly a story told by rich people. People were harder. Dante came in before noon carrying a broken medallion on his open palm. It was old enamel work, a Madonna no bigger than my thumb, cracked straight through the face. "My mother S," he said. I looked up. "Why are you giving me this?" "Because you fix things." The sentence sat between us for a second too long. I took the medallion and set it beneath the lamp. "Not all things." "No," he said, "just the ones honest enough to show the break." There was that almost again, that dangerous, nearly softness. I focused on the work. The fracture line was fine but deep. I mixed adhesive, warmed the metal, aligned the pieces. Dante stood near the window with that impossible stillness of his while I worked. After a while, he tapped his signet ring twice against the wood casing. Tap, tap. The sound no longer made me think only of threat. That bothered me more than it should have. "When I was little," I said, because silence around him often became too heavy to carry, "my father told me repaired pieces shouldn't lie." Dante looked over. "What does that mean?" I reached for a tiny vial of powdered gold and resin. "If something cracks, you can hide it badly. Or you can mend it in a way that admits damage and survives it. You put gold in the seam. Yes, so everyone sees where it broke. Yes." His gaze stayed on my hands. "That seems cruel." "No," I bent closer to the medallion. "Cruel is asking something broken to pretend it was never dropped." When I finished, the Madonna's face was whole again. The crack, a thin line of gold, glinting through the blue enamel, like a secret that had learned dignity. Dante came beside me, too close. His shoulder nearly brushed mine. Almost, I held the medallion up. "It'll hold," I said, "but it won't ever be what it was." He took it carefully. His fingers touched mine, a direct touch, bare skin. It lasted less than a second. It stayed much longer. "My father taught me micro-engraving too," I said before courage failed. "The code in the ring is his hand. I knew there was something hidden in it." Dante's expression changed by degrees. Not shock. Calculation tightening around something more personal. "You knew. I knew there was writing. I didn't know what it meant." Shame climbed my throat anyway. "He told me never to hand the ring to anyone if something happened to him. And yet you threw it at Bianca. I thought she was your mistress. You keep reminding me of that. You keep reminding me." "Of that, I'll stop," I said. "When you stop sounding offended that I thought you slept with the woman you kept parading in front of me." For one impossible second, Dante almost smiled. Not warmth, not amusement exactly, something more dangerous, recognition. Then the moment passed, and the workshop became a workshop again. Lamplight, metal dust, my father's files laid out in disciplined rows, the ring between us like a live wire pretending to be jewelry. Lucia came in without knocking, because women like Lucia did not knock when numbers were involved. Marco followed her with 2 espressos, and the expression of a man who expected either a breakthrough or a bullet. "We ran the first sequence against port schedules," Lucia said, laying a folder on my bench. "It matches nothing." "Because it isn't written for ports," I said. All 3 of them looked at me. I turned the copied code toward the light. "These aren't shipping marks. They only look like them if you want them to. This is jeweler's notation." I tapped the page with the blunt end of my tweezers. "Stone sizes, millimeter cuts, seating depths. My father used shorthand like this when he wanted to hide measurements inside invoices." Lucia leaned closer. Meaning the root isn't a root." I pointed again. "It's a key." Dante went very still. "For what?" I traced the numbers with my fingertip. "This line here, 4261, isn't a container sequence. It's how he marked drawer placement in the old rolling cases at the shop. Left to right, top to bottom." My throat tightened as the pattern resolved. "He wasn't telling us where to ship something." I looked up. "He was telling me where to look." No one spoke. Then Dante said, "Mulberry." I nodded once. "We already searched the shop," Marco said. "You search like men," I said. Lucia's mouth twitched. Dante's gaze stayed on me. "Explain." "My father built hiding places the same way he repaired settings, inside the structure people assumed was solid." I lifted my chin toward the far cabinet where Dante's mother's medallion still rested on black velvet. "People look at the stone. They rarely examine the seam." I went back to the bench at Mulberry before noon with Dante at my shoulder, Marco at the door, and Nico complaining softly behind us that if anyone shot at him before lunch, he would consider it class warfare. The shop smelled wrong, not ruined, violated, that was worse. I crossed to the oldest display case in the room. The one my father refused to replace even when the rollers stuck, and one brass handle came loose every winter. I crouched. Ran my fingers beneath the bottom drawer, found the notch, my pulse stumbled. "Move," Dante said quietly. "I found it." So did I, but he didn't push me aside. He only knelt opposite me, broad shoulders crowding the narrow aisle, and watched my good hand work the spring release my father had carved into the wood, so neatly, no one would ever think to call it anything but where. The false bottom lifted with a dry little sigh. Inside was a waxed packet, a key on a saint's metal chain, and an envelope with my name written across the front in my father's hand. For a moment the room tilted. I forgot Dante, forgot the men, forgot the guns and the house and the fact that my life now seemed to require armed escorts to buy morning bread. All I saw was that handwriting, Adriana. My vision blurred hard enough to humiliate me. Dante saw. Of course he did. He reached for the envelope and stopped before touching it. "I won't open it," he said. The restraint in that mattered more than it should have. I took the letter with shaking fingers and slid the packet to Lucia. She peeled back the waxed paper and inhaled sharply. Ledger pages, photographs, transfer slips. Marco swore under his breath. Lucia didn't, which was somehow worse. "What?" Dante asked. Her eyes moved across the first page. "Your uncle's private routes, shell companies, judges, shipping fronts." Her voice flattened further. "Girls." Silence dropped like a blade. I looked at Dante. His face did not change, only the air around him did. "What girls?" Nico asked from the doorway, very softly now. Lucia lifted another page. "Young, unregistered. Moved through charity cargo and river storage." Her jaw tightened. "Someone made a business out of disappearing daughters." Something old and ugly moved through my bones. My father had not hidden money. He had hidden rot. Dante took the saint's metal key from the false bottom and turned it over once in his hand. "Where does it go?" I opened the envelope because if I waited another second, I thought I might stop breathing. Inside was one page. "Adriana, if you are reading this, then the choice was made for me before I could make it for you. I prayed I would live long enough to tell you myself, but prayer is a poor lock against powerful men. I put the first line where your hands would find it. I put the second where his blood would. If Dante Salvator still grieves, trust him. If he does not, burn everything. Do not let Raphael reach the river vault. Rosa saw what she should not have seen. I believe they killed her for it. Forgive me for giving your future to danger when danger was the only place I could still hide you." Papa, the paper trembled in my hand. Dante read none of it. He watched my face instead. "What did he say?" I swallowed once, twice, then forced the words out. "He believed your sister was murdered." The workshop went soundless. Dante took a step back as if something had struck him in the chest. Before anyone could speak, the bell above the shop door rang. Marco's gun appeared in his hand, so quickly my body barely understood the movement. Bianca Vescari stood in the doorway in yesterday's silk and someone else's blood. Her lipstick was gone. So was the practiced ease. One side of her face was bruised violet beneath the powder she had not had time to finish applying. She looked at Dante and said, "Your uncle knows the Bellini girl found the key." Dante's voice came out lower than I had ever heard it. "How long have you been running from him?" Bianca laughed once, brittle as a snapped heel. "Since he decided I knew too much to keep pretty." Then her gaze shifted to the letter in my hand. To the key in his, to the ledger in Lucia's grip, and for the first time since I had met her, Bianca Vescari looked afraid. "Don't let him reach the river vault," she said. "If Raphael gets there first, your sister dies twice." Dante didn't blink. "Tonight," he said. Lucia frowned. "You need a full perimeter plan. I need my uncle in a grave." His eyes came to me. Cold, furious, burning with something I did not yet know how to name. "You're staying at the house." "No," it came out before caution could. Marco closed his eyes briefly, as if offering a private prayer for my judgment. Dante stared at me. "You do not get to tell me no when men are already shooting through my windows for what's in your father's handwriting." "I do," I said, "when my father is the one who hid it." His jaw locked. The signet ring on his hand tapped once against the metal key. Tap, tap. The sound was smaller than usual, worse for it. "The vault is jeweler-coated," I said. "If he built the second line like the first, you need me. You are not bait." "No," I said. "I'm useful. Try coping with it." Nico made a pained little sound into his coffee. Lucia looked between us like a woman calculating the exact cost of stubbornness in bullets per hour. At last Dante stepped closer. Not enough to touch. Enough to make the space between us feel chosen. "If you come," he said quietly, "you stay where I can reach you." I should have refused on principle. Instead, I heard myself answer, just as quietly, "Then don't let go, Dante." The Hudson at night looked like a blade that had decided to become a river out of boredom. The warehouse district along the edge of it was all chain link, floodlights, and concrete pretending not to know what had bled there over the years. Cold rose off the water and slid beneath my coat as the convoy cut its headlights 2 blocks out. Nico parked beside a line of rusting freight containers and muttered, "If a single goose comes out of this fog, I'm retiring." "There are no geese on industrial piers," Marco said. "That sounds like something a goose would arrange." Dante opened my door himself. I tried not to notice. Failed. The river vault turned out not to be a vault at all. It was a cold storage office inside Warehouse 12, fronted by a bookkeeping desk and a devotional candle burning beneath a cheap plaster saint. Raphael apparently preferred his sin tax-deductible and half-blessed. Lucia stayed in the van with the ledger pages and a secure line open. Marco took 2 men to the east doors. Bianca, under guard, stood near the loading bay in a coat borrowed from Teresa, and a look that made clear she hated the fit, the gratitude, and possibly the concept of wool. Inside the office, I set the metal key on the desk. It didn't fit the drawers. It fit the candle stand. Of course it did. My father never hid anything where men expected weight. He hid it where habit made people blind. The base turned with a soft click. A compartment slid open beneath the saint's chipped feet. Inside sat a narrow metal cassette and a child's silver charm bracelet, blackened by old heat. Dante made a sound I had not known a human throat could produce without splitting. Not loud. Worse. Cut off, he took the bracelet in both hands as if it might disintegrate if touched by anything less careful than grief. Tiny bells hung from it, fused at the edges. I didn't need to ask whose it had been. "Rosa," he said, and the name was barely a name at all. Then the first shot hit the warehouse shutters. Metal shrieked. Marco shouted from outside. The second shot blew out the office window, showering the floor with sugar-fine safety glass. Dante moved before the sound finished breaking. He shoved the cassette into my coat, grabbed my wrist, and pulled me down behind the desk just as 3 more rounds punched through the wall. Bianca's voice rang from the loading bay. "They're on the roof," then gunfire answered her. Not at us. For us. Nico barreled through the side door with a shotgun and the expression of a man whose diet had just become secondary to vengeance. "I knew this smelled like betrayal," he snapped. Smoke rolled under the warehouse door a second later. Not gun smoke. Thicker, darker. Fire. Someone had lit accelerant along the container line outside to drive us inward. The office filled fast with heat and orange reflection. The devotional candle toppled from the desk and licked at a spill of paper. Marco stamped it out and shouted for the west exit. Dante did not move. I turned. He was staring at the flames crawling beneath the shutter seam like they had hands. His face had gone blank in the way terror sometimes disguised itself as absence. Every line of him was still, too still. "Dante!" Nothing. Outside, someone screamed. Inside, metal popped in the walls as the heat climbed. Nico looked at me once, quick, startled, helpless in a way that made him seem suddenly younger, and then back at the boss he had probably never imagined frozen by anything human. "Boss!" Still nothing. I took 1 step closer, then another, until I could put my good hand flat against the center of his chest. His heart was battering itself to death beneath my palm. "Look at me!" His eyes came to mine. Not seeing, I kept my voice quiet because somewhere in me I already understood that volume would only make the room smaller. "It's not then," I said. "It's now." A tremor moved through his jaw. "You're here," I went on. "I'm here. Rosa is not in that fire. I'm not in that fire. Open the door." His breathing hitched. The whole room seemed to wait with it. Then, finally, he blinked. Once. Hard, and the man came back into his own body like someone entering a house after winter. He turned, shot the padlock off the west shutter, and kicked the door up so violently the metal bent outward. Cold night and river air slammed in. "Move!" he roared. Everything after that became speed. Marco first. Bianca behind him, returning fire with a pistol she absolutely had not been given permission to have. Nico shoving me through the opening while insulting several bloodlines at once. Dante last, because men like him believed protection meant becoming the wall until everyone else was past it. We made the alley between warehouse rows, just as the office windows blew out behind us. Flame climbed one container stack and painted the river gold. A bullet hit the concrete near my foot. Another took the side mirror off the armored sedan in a burst of sparks. Dante spun, fired twice, and someone on the roof went down with a shout. Then he turned back to me and took my face between both hands. Not gently, not roughly either. Like he needed proof I was made of matter and not smoke. "You do not do that again." I was shaking too hard to know whether it came from fear or the place my pulse had gone wild beneath his touch. "Do what?" I asked. "Walk into fire for me." I stared up at him. "I didn't." His thumbs pressed once beneath my cheekbones. "You did," he said. Then he kissed me, not a soft first kiss, not cautious. Nothing about Dante Salvetor had ever suggested caution, where feeling was concerned. He kissed me like a man who had held a room together by force for years and suddenly found one thing he could not command not to matter. It lasted 3 seconds, maybe 4. Long enough to ruin me for lesser silences. When he pulled back, the whole world felt rearranged and unhelpfully full of witnesses. Nico looked away with exaggerated concentration toward the river. Bianca raised one brow through the blood at her temple. Marco said, "We should leave," in the tone of a man who preferred not to die inside a romance he had not consented to attend. Dante's forehead rested briefly against mine. A restraint, a confession, a threat to whatever life I thought I still had outside him. Then he stepped back and took command of the night again. In the car, while sirens grew somewhere far off and Lucia cracked open the cassette with a letter opener from hell, I touched 2 fingers to my mouth and tasted smoke, salt. And the exact moment, my judgment had abandoned me. Inside the metal cassette were 6 memory cards, 2 notarized deeds, and 1 photograph of a teenage girl wearing a silver charm bracelet and smiling at someone outside the frame. On the back, in a woman's slanting hand, was written, "Rosa saw him load the girls. If anything happens to me, give this to Bellini." By the time dawn broke over Salvetor House, the war had acquired paperwork. Lucia spread the contents of the river cassette across the library table with the reverence of a surgeon laying out instruments before opening a chest. The memory cards held manifests, account routes, and video clips, so vile Nico stopped joking halfway through the first one and went outside to be sick in the gravel. The deeds were for 2 properties on the river. One belonged to a charity front. The other belonged to the Salvetor Family Trust. Raphael had been moving girls and money through family property for years, and Rosa had seen it. That was why she died. Not in a deal gone wrong, not in chaos, in cleanup. Dante did not throw anything. That frightened me more than if he had. He only stood at the head of the table with one hand braced against the wood and listened while Lucia explained the final problem. "These files bury him," she said. "But if you go to the captains with this now, Raphael will deny, split the family, and start shooting before sunset." "He's already shooting," Marco muttered. Lucia ignored him. "You need the trust seal and the chapel register if you want the older guard to accept the evidence as binding. Without those, he calls this theft and frames Bellini for fabrication." I frowned. "What chapel register?" The marriage register kept beneath the old family altar, Lucia said. Every succession, marriage contract, and trust amendment for 3 generations. If Raphael altered the roots through family property, the original authority will be there. And only the head of the family can open it, Marco said. Lucia looked at Dante. Or his wife. The room went still in a way I was beginning to hate on principle. I stared at her, then at Dante, then back. No, Nico, from the door with the haunted pallor of a man who had seen the internet in its worst form, pointed weakly. I support that tone. Dante's gaze never left mine. Marry me before he can move again. The audacity of it emptied my lungs. You cannot possibly think that is an acceptable solution. I think it is the fastest one. That is not the same thing. No, he said. It is. For once, he did not try to force the distinction smaller. That only made me angrier. I pushed back from the table and walked to the far window because if I stayed still, I might commit a felony with a letter opener. The grounds below were washed silver by morning. Men moved between the hedges with guns hidden beneath coats tailored to look expensive enough to make violence tasteful. Behind me, Dante said my name. I kept looking out. Do not do that low-voice thing, I said. It always means you're about to say something infuriating with perfect posture. A brief pause. Then, from Nico, almost reverent, she sees him. I turned. Dante had not moved, but something in his face had gone more open than usual. Not soft, never that simple, just less armored around the truth. I chose the arrangement with your father because he trusted the Bologna name, he said. Because he refused my uncle before he refused most men. Because I needed someone tied to no faction in my house. The words hurt more than if he'd lied. Useful, I said. At first. The silence after that was a dangerous thing. Lucia found sudden fascination in a stack of notarized deeds. Marco developed an urgent interest in the ceiling. Nico made a sign of the cross for reasons that were, at best, aspirational. At first, I repeated, Dante came around the table, slowly enough that I could have stepped back if I wanted. I didn't. That changed. I hated my pulse for listening. When? I asked. His eyes dropped to the bandage on my hand. When you bled instead of begging. That should not have done anything to me. It did far too much. I folded my arms to hide it. That still doesn't make this a proposal. No, he said quietly. It makes it a bargain. Romantic. I'm not asking for romance. Good, I said. Because you'd be terrible at it. Something sharp flickered in his eyes. Possibly offense. Possibly heat. The line between the two around him had become inconveniently thin. Teresa entered before either of us could make the room more dangerous. She set down a tray of coffee and looked from my face to Dante's to the documents spread across the table. Ah, she said. Murder or wedding? Nico answered immediately. Both, probably. Teresa sighed the sigh of a woman the world did not deserve. Then have coffee before either. I accepted the cup she handed me and said, without taking my eyes off Dante, if I agree, I want conditions. His expression changed by a degree. Name them. No lies about women you keep orbiting me to make other people comfortable. Done. No locks without keys. His jaw tightened. Done. If I ask a direct question, you answer it. When I can. When you can honestly, I corrected. A longer pause, then done. I should have stopped there. Instead, I heard myself say the thing that had mattered underneath all the others. And if I do this, Dante, you do not own me because a priest says words over us. The entire room seemed to sharpen. He came one step closer. So close I could see the faint shadow where exhaustion had darkened beneath his eyes and the tiny pale line near his mouth that old violence had left him. When you belong to me, he said, low enough that only I could hear, it will not be because a priest said anything. The air vanished from my chest. He let the sentence sit between us like a hand at the back of my neck. Then he stepped away because restraint with him was never absence. It was selection. I set my coffee down before I spilled it. Yes, I said. Lucia exhaled softly through her nose as if revising several forecasts at once. Marco muttered, Christ. Nico brightened. Excellent. If we survive, I'm demanding cake. Teresa patted his cheek on her way out. Survive first. Then carbohydrates. That evening, Dante found me in the workshop retaping my bandage one-handed and failing with dignity only in the technical sense. He took the linen strip from me without asking. You always solve problems by issuing vows and tactical deadlines, I asked. Only the important ones. He wrapped my hand carefully, far too carefully for a man who broke tables with his bare hands. You said this is a bargain, I said. It is. And after, his fingers paused at my wrist. After, he said, finishing the knot, we see whether you still want my name when it no longer protects you from anything. I looked at him then, really looked. At the man who had asked for my life like a strategy and answered my fear like a fact. My voice came out quieter than I meant it to. That's a dangerous thing to say to me. His thumb rested once against the inside of my wrist, where my pulse betrayed everything. Yet, he said, is a dangerous word too, little spark. The locked wing opened for me the next afternoon, not because I found a key, because Dante gave me one. He set it on the breakfast plate beside my espresso with no note and no witness, just the old brass key lying against white porcelain like an argument he had already lost privately. I carried it upstairs for an hour before using it. The room at the end of the wing was not a bedroom so much as a preserved weather system. Light gold curtains, a narrow bed with a carved headboard. Shelves of books in Italian and English. A wardrobe painted with saints at the doors, all of them watching me like disappointed relatives. On the vanity sat a tiny porcelain horse with one ear repaired in silver solder, so neat it had to have been my father's work. Rosa had loved beautiful things, and someone had frozen her in them. I was standing at the window when Dante appeared in the doorway. He did not speak. He only leaned one shoulder against the frame and let me choose whether to run. I held up the porcelain horse. My father fixed this. He fixed half the house, Dante said. My mother preferred his repairs because he didn't erase the damage. Something in me tightened. I set the horse down. Was Rosa like this room? His eyes moved slowly over the books, the bed, the curtains breathing once in the river air. Yes, he said. Bright enough to make men lie more beautifully than usual. It was the closest thing to affection I had heard in his voice about anyone. I touched the spine of a prayer book on the shelf and found a paper tucked behind it. Not a letter. A receipt from Bellini Restorations dated 11 years earlier. Repair silver locket clasp heat damage. I turned. Dante had seen it too. You kept everything. I failed everything, he said. Keeping was what remained. There it was, the center of him. Not power, not violence. Guilt made elegant by expensive clothes. I held the receipt carefully between finger and thumb. Tell me. His jaw worked once. Twice. Then he walked into the room and shut the door behind him. When I was 19, Raphael told me there was a problem at the river. He said Rosa had wandered into a meeting and needed to stay in the car until I finished handling it. His gaze fixed on the locket-shaped space on the vanity where something no longer sat. I believed him because I still thought obedience and loyalty were cousins. He looked at me then, and the nakedness of the truth in his face was more intimate than skin. I heard shouting inside the warehouse, then gunfire, then fire. His voice roughened on the last word as if it had edges. By the time I got back to the car, the doors had jammed. She was pounding the glass. My own breath thinned. Dante! I couldn't get her out. The room felt suddenly smaller than the coffin it had never been meant to resemble. He laughed once without humor. Men tell the story differently now. They say it was a war thing, a tragedy, collateral. What a sterile little word that is. He glanced toward the saints on the wardrobe doors. Raphael told me I survived because I learned that night what hesitation costs. And what did it really cost? I asked. His gaze came back to mine. Everything after. Silence moved between us, not empty now but full of what honesty left behind when it stopped pretending to be civilized. I stepped closer, slowly, not because I feared him. Because grief deserved warning before touch. My father wrote that if you still grieved, I should trust you. Dante went still. That was his phrase. Yes. Something almost broke across his face. He looked away first. Of course he did. I followed his line of sight and noticed the Madonna medallion on Rosa's vanity, Dante's mother's piece, the one I had repaired. The gold seam I had laid into the crack glimmered in the afternoon light. Too thick. My father had taught me better than thick. I picked it up, turned it over, and pressed my thumbnail against the back plate. It shifted. A hidden compartment opened with a soft click. Inside was a key no bigger than a fingernail and a folded square of paper. Dante swore under his breath. I unfolded the paper. It was not from my father. It was from Dante's mother. Matteo Bellini, if anything happens to Rosa or me, keep a record outside this house. My husband is dead and my brother-in-law thinks grief makes women blind. It does not. It makes us patient. If Dante grows into his uncle, burn this. If he grows away from him, help him kill what remains. Elena Salvator, I handed it to him. He read it once, then again, slower. When he finally looked up, something old in him had gone raw. Your father knew. Enough to be terrified, I said. He nodded once. Then the space between us changed, not dramatically, quietly. The way metal changed when heat finally reached its core. His hand came up and stopped beside my face, waiting. I leaned into it before I could decide whether I ought to. His palm was warm, steady. The gentlest thing about him, which was unfair of the universe on several levels. I'm sorry, I whispered, and meant for Rosa, for my father, for him, for all of it. He bent his forehead to mine. No urgency this time. No fire. Just the unbearable tenderness of a man trying not to take more than he was offered. When he kissed me, it felt like a vow neither of us was foolish enough to say aloud yet. A single knock split the moment. Bianca's voice came through the door. Interrupting what looks emotionally expensive, she called, but Raphael has sent word. He plans to attend the wedding. Dante's mouth remained a breath from mine. Good, he said. I swallowed. Why good? He drew back just enough to answer. Because now he dies in public. Weddings, I learned, were only holy if you ignored the rifles. Salvator House filled by noon with silk, old money, and men whose formal wear fit too cleanly over shoulder holsters. The family chapel on the grounds smelled of candle wax, cut roses, and the kind of history that mistook endurance for moral worth. Teresa dressed me in ivory silk with sleeves fine as breath and fastened my mother's pearls at my throat herself. You can still run, she said, pinning the veil. Can I? No, she said cheerfully. But it's important you feel consulted. Nico, stationed by the mirror in a black suit, strained heroically across his shoulders, dabbed at one eye. I always cry at armed ceremonies. You cried at Marco's dog getting stitches. It was a brave dog. Teresa slapped his hand away from the pastry tray. Stop eating emergency cannoli. They soothe me. You are not the bride. He lowered his voice and leaned toward me conspiratorially. Between us, Signorina, neither is half the room emotionally. I laughed despite myself. Then the chapel bells began. The sound went through me cleanly. When I stepped into the aisle, every conversation died at once. Dante waited at the altar in black. No tie pin, no visible weapon. Just the signet ring on his hand, catching candlelight each time his fingers flexed, and then went still again. He looked like what he was, a dangerous man forced into patience by something he could not shoot. Raphael stood 3 pews back, silver at the temples. Beautiful in the expensive way rot sometimes was, the sort of man who smiled as if God were an acquaintance he could bribe. Our eyes met only once. Mine slid away first, not in fear, in strategy. At the altar, Dante held out his hand. I looked at it, remembered the first time he had done that over broken glass, remembered the difference between command and choice. Then I placed my hand in his. A murmur moved through the chapel. Raphael liked his women arranged. I had just arranged myself. The priest began. I heard almost none of it. My pulse was too loud. Dante's thumb brushed once across the inside of my wrist where no one could see it. The motion was brief, almost accidental. Nothing about it felt accidental. When the priest asked if anyone objected, Raphael stood. Of course he did. "I object," he said smoothly, "on the grounds that this marriage binds Salvator property to a girl whose father stole from the family." The chapel snapped taut, gasps, movement. Marco's hand disappearing inside his jacket. Nico already shifting his weight toward violence. Lucia in the front pew going colder by the second. Raphael held up a folder. Forged ledgers. Hidden packets, secret letters. How romantic theft becomes when a dead craftsman leaves a pretty daughter behind. The priest looked ready to resign from religion. I looked at Dante. He had gone utterly still. No surprise, which meant he had expected some version of this. Good, so had I, may I asked the priest. The poor man blinked at me like I had requested a weather adjustment. Dante's gaze cut to mine. It held warning, trust, heat, the full ridiculous catastrophe of us in one look. I stepped away from the altar before anyone could stop me and turned to face the chapel. "My father repaired heirlooms for this family for 18 years, I said. If he wanted to steal, he had better opportunities than carrying ledgers in false bottoms and trusting his daughter to find them after his death." Raphael smiled faintly. And yet, I cut in quieter, "you know exactly where he hid things." The smile altered, slightly. Enough. I held up Rose's blackened bracelet. A sound moved through the chapel like fabric tearing. "I found this in your river office," I said. Which is interesting, because according to the story repeated at every table in this family, Rosa died in a deal gone wrong nowhere near the docks. Raphael's face hardened by a degree. Too late. The older men in the pews had seen it. Lucia rose with one arm in her sling and one envelope in her good hand. "Elena Salvator's statement," she said. "Witnessed, dated. Left with Matteo Bellini if anything happened to her daughter." Marco took the folder from Raphael before the older man could close his fingers around it. Nico, from the side aisle, said pleasantly, "I've been waiting all morning to tackle someone at a wedding." Then all civility collapsed. One of Raphael's men drew first. The shot took a candle stand and blasted wax across the stone. Dante moved like the room belonged to his reflexes. He pulled me behind him, gun in hand from nowhere, and the chapel detonated into shouting, splintering wood, and saints rendered temporarily irrelevant by ballistic panic. Bianca fired from the rear pew and caught one of Raphael's men in the shoulder. Marco drove another into a column. The priest did, in fact, resign from the immediate scene by diving behind the altar. And through all of it, Raphael backed toward the sacristy door with a look of pure hatred aimed only at me. Not Dante, me, because I had touched the seam. Because daughters of craftsmen apparently ruined empires. "Stay down," Dante barked. I would have if Bianca had not suddenly jerked sideways with a gasp and hit the floor. Blood spread dark across the silk Teresa had forced her into that morning. I crawled to her before judgment could catch up. "Bianca," she laughed once, wet and bitter. I always thought if I bled in a chapel it would at least buy me better gossip. I pressed my hand to the wound. Her fingers clamped around my wrist. "Under the altar," she whispered. "The register." He moved the original seal below it. Stone latch, left side. He runs if he can't erase it. Her grip tightened once more. "Don't let him turn Rosa into a story." Then Marco was hauling her back, and Dante was dragging me upright with murder in his eyes and relief hitting just beneath it, so hard I felt the force through. His hands. "Enough," he said. Not to me, to the room, to the blood, to the family that had mistaken silence for consent too many times. Raphael disappeared through the sacristy door. Dante looked at Marco. At the crypt, then at me, his voice dropped. "You stay behind me." I met his gaze over the torn wedding silk, the gunsmoke, the ruined altar flowers, and the man I had just married in the middle of a war. "No," I said softly. "I stay with you." The entrance to the crypt lay exactly where Bianca said it would, beneath the left side altar stone. Hidden behind a latch cut so neatly into the marble, I would have admired it if I weren't busy developing a permanent hostility to secret family architecture. Marco and two men went first. Lucia, pale but upright, followed with the chapel register wrapped in linen under her arm. Dante tried one last time to make me stay above ground. I answered by taking the signet ring from his hand before he could stop me, the one movement in the world that still reliably shocked him. "I need this," I said. His eyes dropped to the ring in my palm, then lifted slowly to my face. "Adriana, if the seal is coded, I'm the better bet." He looked like he wanted to refuse on principle and kiss me on instinct. Instead he said, very low, "If you disappear from my sight down there, I'll burn the whole chapel to bedrock." That seems theatrically inefficient. It's also true. The crypt stairs wound beneath the chapel into air so cold it made the gunsmoke above feel imaginary. Family niches lined the walls, gold-lettered names, marble saints, the expensive kind of grief that expected eternity to notice. At the far end stood an iron gate, and beyond it, a stone archive room lit by one bare bulb. Raphael waited inside with a pistol and Teresa Valley in front of him, one arm locked across her throat, his gun pressed beneath her jaw. Nico made a sound that belonged to an animal, not a man. Teresa rolled her eyes with astonishing dignity for someone currently held hostage in a crypt. "I told him his tie was ugly," she said. "He took it personally." "Drop the register," Raphael said. Lucia did not move. His gaze shifted to me, then to the ring in my hand. "There you are," he said softly. "Little Bellini found the seam after all." Dante stepped half in front of me. Raphael's gun bit harder against Teresa's skin. "One more inch and she dies first," he said. "Then the housekeeper, then the girl." "Then maybe I explain to you again what happens when sentiment outranks obedience." The last word hit Dante like a slap. I felt him go colder beside me. This, then, was the old language. The one that had burned a sister alive and called it instruction. Raphael smiled faintly. "Your father never understood necessity, Adriana. Mine did." "Matteo should have taken the money and kept quiet." My blood iced. "You killed him." "Your father killed himself," Raphael said. "Men who stand in front of trucks usually mean to lose." I think something in me ended there, not innocence. That had died at the banquet table, something softer. A willingness to believe evil at least had the courtesy to look monstrous all the time. Dante's voice came out like iron dragged over stone. "You used Rosa." Raphael's eyes flicked to him, amused. "I used your obedience. Rosa was collateral. The Bellini girl was insurance. You were always so easy to move with the right guilt." Beside me, Nico's breathing had turned feral. Teresa somehow still found room for irritation. "If anyone kills him," she said tightly, "I'd like a turn first." Raphael laughed. "Enough, the ring." Dante's hand closed around my wrist, hard. A warning, a plea, the first I had ever felt from him. I looked down at his fingers, then up at his uncle, and understood all at once why my father had trusted craftsmen over kings. Kings thought value lived in ownership. Craftsmen knew it lived in what hands could alter. Earlier in the workshop, while Teresa pretended not to notice and Lucia pretended not to approve, I had reset the ring. Not the diamond, the underside, the second seam. I had moved the true microplate into the repaired Madonna medallion and left only the outer line in the band. Enough to satisfy a man too greedy to inspect his prize before using it. Enough to buy time. I slipped the ring from my palm. Dante's grip tightened painfully. "Don't," he said, quiet, raw, almost unrecognizable. Raphael smiled. Teresa closed her eyes. And I threw the ring. It flashed once beneath the crypt light and landed at Raphael's feet. Dante screamed. The sound tore through the stone chamber like something living dragged open. Not anger. Not wounded pride. Fear so old it had learned his bones by name. Raphael shoved Teresa aside to snatch the ring. That second cost him everything. Nico moved first, crossing the space with a roar and slamming Teresa to safety behind a pillar. Marco fired. Lucia threw the register into my arms and went for the side wall where the seal box sat inset in stone. Dante vaulted the half-open gate with such force the hinges shrieked. Raphael got one shot off. It went wide. Then Dante hit him. They went down together in a fury of fists, marble dust, and decades finally refusing to remain decorous. No elegance now, no mafia king. Just a man beating the architect of his sister's death with both hands because grief, denied long enough, always came back for its full body. I ran to the wall box. The seal mechanism took the signet pattern and a hidden latch. Not the ring, the medallion. I pulled Dante's mother's repaired Madonna from my bodice, where I had hidden it, and pressed the tiny key from its back into the seam beside the stone plate. The lock released. Inside sat the original trust seal, 3 signed registers, and a tape cassette so old it made my pulse skip. Evidence. Not of money, of witness. Behind me, Raphael hissed something through blood. Dante answered by driving him into the floor hard enough to crack one of the burial tiles. "Say her name," Dante said. Raphael spat red and laughed. Rosa screamed longer than I expected. I turned too late to stop what happened next. Dante's face changed. Not expression, species. He picked up Raphael's own gun. For one terrible second, I thought he would become exactly what his uncle had trained. Then Bianca's voice came from the crypt stairs. "Don't waste redemption on him." Everyone looked. She stood pale as candle wax, one hand pressed to the bandage across her ribs, pistol steady in the other. Raphael stared. "Bianca!" She shot him through the heart. Once. Clean, final. The sound rang through the crypt and died there. Raphael Salvetor looked surprised longer than I thought a man could after death. Then surprise left him too. No one moved. Bianca lowered the gun with visible effort. "He sold my sister at 16, she said to no one in particular. "I got tired of working for family." Then she swayed. Marco caught her before she hit the floor. Dante remained kneeling over his uncle's body, chest heaving, gun hanging slack from his fingers. I crossed the chamber slowly. Knelt. Put my hand over the one holding the weapon. He looked at me as if from somewhere very far away. "It's done," I whispered. His eyes closed, just once. When they opened again, he let the gun go. 3 weeks later, the gates of Salvetor House opened because I chose to walk through them. That was the first difference. The second was that they closed behind me without sounding like a prison. Winter had thinned toward spring. The river beyond the grounds no longer looked like sheet metal. Men still worked the perimeter, but fewer of them wore secrecy like a sacrament. Lucia had spent the weeks since Raphael's death dismantling shell companies, with the efficiency of a woman cleaning blood from a ledger 1 decimal at a time. Marco had stopped looking at doorways as if each one might produce a sniper. Bianca had vanished after giving her statement and leaving 2 sentences on a torn page for Lucia. "Don't look for me." Burn my red dresses. Nico had proposed to Teresa in the pantry over a contraband plate of linguine. She accepted after informing him his knees cracked too loudly for a graceful offer. I had gone back to Mulberry twice. The shop still smelled like my father. That hurt in ways I suspected always would, but it no longer felt abandoned. Half my tools remained there. The other half lived in the East Wing workshop at Salvetor House, where morning light still fell across the bench exactly how I liked it. That was the third difference. He had not moved me again. He had made room. I found Dante in the conservatory at dusk. Standing among leafless citrus trees and old iron benches with a velvet box in one hand, and that impossible patience in the set of his shoulders that usually meant he was pretending not to wait. "Teresa said if I didn't come in here, you would eventually start haunting the lemons," I said. He turned. The last of the evening light touched the scar near his mouth and the gold at his hand. "You left after lunch. I went to my shop, and Nico bought 3 pastries and lied about all of them. That sounds accurate." I stopped in front of him. We were quiet together now in a way that no longer felt like a threat. He held out the velvet box, not command. Offering, I opened it. Inside lay my ring. No, the ring, but altered. The old diamond still caught light with the same arrogant beauty. The platinum still curved heavily, familiarly, around the center stone. Yet the inner band had been changed. A fine line of gold ran through it where the hidden seam had once been invisible. Visible repair, visible truth. I looked up. Dante's gaze stayed on my face, not the ring. "I had them leave the break showing," he said. "You were right." My throat tightened at the memory of the medallion in my hands, the gold seam bright against blue enamel, the lesson my father taught me about honest damage. I turned the ring over. Inside the band, beneath the date and his initials, was a new engraving. No locks without keys. I laughed before I could help it, softly. Enough to ease something in his mouth that was not quite a smile and not quite relief. "Bribery," I said. "Documentation." I closed the box and held it between us. "Dante," he inhaled once. Then did the one thing I had not expected from him even after everything. He asked, "If you put this on again," he said, voice low and steady, "I want it to be because you choose me when you are free to leave. Not because your father bartered. Not because my name shields you. Not because a war cornered you into vows." His eyes held mine with terrifying openness. "Choose me, Adriana. There are moments when the heart makes less sense than any violence that came before it." This was one. I thought of the banquet table, of blood on linen and crystal on marble, of a locked wing opening because he gave me the key, of Rose's room, of fire. Of the way he had screamed when I threw the ring to his uncle, not because I humiliated him, but because losing me had become, to him, an old catastrophe wearing a new face. I thought of my father writing danger was the only place left to hide me. I thought of how love, for people like us, might never look clean enough for easier lives to understand. Then I took the ring from the box and slid it onto my finger myself. No priest, no witnesses, no bargain, just choice. Dante went still, not with fear this time. With the force of holding still against feeling. My voice came out quiet, as it always did when I meant something enough to stop performing it. "I'm done," I said. His eyes darkened with the ghost of that first terrible night. "Done with what?" "Leaving." The breath he took then sounded like a man surfacing. He reached for me slowly enough that I could have stopped him. I didn't. His hands settled at my waist. Warm, certain. Careful with the fact of me, in a way. I doubted anyone else would ever fully understand. "You are," he said, mouth brushing mine before the words finished. The only soft thing left in this room. I should have reminded him that I had once threatened to set fire to a dynasty with a sentence. Instead, I kissed him. No smoke, no gunfire, no audience. Just the clean devastation of finally wanting something with my whole body and no excuse left not to admit it. When we drew apart, he rested his forehead to mine and tapped his signet ring lightly against the iron bench at my back. Tap, tap. The sound no longer meant danger first. Now it meant him. Outside the conservatory glass, the gates stood open to the river road until dark. No one closed them, not until I was ready.